Welcome everyone to this interview edition of Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill. Today's episode is a conversation with Jon Wertheim. If you're a tennis fan, you're probably familiar with him. He's a senior writer and an executive editor at Sports Illustrated, a commentator at Tennis Channel, and a correspondent with 60 Minutes. Quite frankly, I don't think there's anyone better at covering the nexus of tennis and worldly issues than Jon Wertheim. So I wanted to take advantage of that. There's talk about the pandemic, references to Michael Jordan and the UFC. I was able to pry some information out of him on the U.S. Open because Jon's really well sourced with the USTA and the tournament. And I was really happy with how many topics we got to in a span of a little over 30 minutes. So without further ado, Jon Wertheim. We're joined for the first time by Jon Wertheim. He's a senior writer and executive editor for Sports Illustrated, a commentator for Tennis Channel, and a 60 Minutes correspondent. Kind enough to join us on this Friday afternoon. Jon, how are you?
Good, thanks. All things considered. I don't know. Is anyone good these days? I'm as good as could be. I hope you are too.
Yeah, you almost have to adjust the question slightly,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So I promise you've come on a tennis show, but I still want to start with UFC because I once heard you say that tennis is just MMA with a racket. And it made me smile because it's the kind of thing that I would say and people would look at me like I have 10 eyes. So how do you defend that statement?
Oh man, I always say I once had a throwaway line that my two favorite sports are tennis, UFC, and one of them is vicious, damaging one-on-one gladiatorial sport, and the other is cage fighting. There are a lot of similarities. And I just think we sometimes gloss over individual versus team sports, but they're really such a different exercise. They attract such a different kind of athlete. The training is different. The rhythms are different. I always say even in MMA, once every 5 minutes, you get to go, once in between rounds, you get 60 seconds of your corner telling you what to do and pumping you up and giving you fluids. Tennis is really I always like the Agassi line about solitary confinement. But I think, obviously getting blasted. I don't know if you saw the fight the other, I guess it was 2 nights ago. I don't know if you watched, you watched the fight the other night where,
Anthony Smith.
We're Glover. Yeah, Anthony Smith. You know where I'm going with this. Where Glover was beating Anthony Smith and he picked up his teeth and handed them to the ref. We don't see Ali Risk or Riley Opelka hasn't had to pick up his teeth in the middle of a match too many times. But get out the physical damage, and there actually I think are a lot of overlap there.
It was close a couple years back. Medvedev and Tsitsipas, that got a little sketchy, but you're right. We haven't quite gotten to that length. But yeah, so UFC, as you just alluded to, it's the first real high level sport back in the age of this pandemic. And of course, it's been held with no fans. But interestingly enough, I've found it to be completely and utterly enjoyable. In some respects, even better than the product that the TV product at least, with the fans, because the natural sound is so good. You can hear all the strikes. You can hear the corner yelling instructions. But I don't know if tennis stands to benefit in the same way from no fans.
Yeah, I don't know. Hold on a sec. I don't know about. It's a little bit different, but I still think it's way better than nothing. And
Sure.
no, I think you're right. In MMA, you're so locked in. You're not really playing to the crowd. It's not the kind of sport where the people are dancing in the suites. I think you're absolutely right. I think not only can you hear the corner, but you can hear the broadcast through the ringside. Through the cage side mic. And I think, you can get the fights on faster. There's less time in between the fights. I think MMA actually lends itself pretty well. I do think, I don't know if you saw the New York Times piece. I do think there are some safety hazards, and I do worry sort of we're not going to be quite as optimistic about this when there are some of these safety violations. But no, I think, I don't know if you saw the Tennis Channel matches from Florida, the UTR event.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the same. We all would have preferred to be gearing up for the French Open, but after 5 minutes of there are no ball kids or no fans, these guys are calling their own lines. It still looked like pro tennis to me. So I think tennis can really benefit here. And I think it would be nice to see. I mean, the U.S. Open, as we record this, the U.S. Open is hell bent on trying to figure out a way to make this thing happen. I'm not pessimistic, but not optimistic. But I do think tennis ought to be taking advantage of this opportunity. And you've got two athletes 40, 50 feet apart, so there's no social distancing problem there. And I'm talking Federer and Nadal. I mean, I'll watch, pick two names. Philip Kohlschreiber play Vasek Pospisil without ball kids and calling their own lines, if it means getting pro tennis back. So I think I think you're right. I think MMA and UFC is extraordinary. You really don't concentrate on the crowd during the action, and in some ways it enhances it. I think that's really perceptive. But I think tennis definitely could return in some form, and I think will return soon in some form.
Yeah, I'd love to get to the U.S. Open in a moment, but speaking of the exhibitions, I agree with you. One of the main advantages that I think the UTR pro event had is the camera angle was fantastic. It's where the fan in the front row would generally sit. So that's one advantage you have right there. All in all, I would actually like to see tennis in the kind of domestic exhibition trend that we may see. Take a page out of MMA's book. Instead of doing round robin fast four, build a card. That way you can market these individual matchups, put some prize money in there. I mean, what are the chances that for the next couple months, or we don't know how long, that it's really about which exhibition is able to get it right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is all sort of stopgap stuff, and I don't know how much pressure there is to get it right. I mean, you sort of hold it, everyone gets a couple of shekels, we get some tennis, you move on. I mean, I don't think anyone's looking to sort of really innovate, but I think you're right. I mean, if you had, UTR is sponsoring this, and if you had all the players who were, 12.81 against 12.81, 12.82, you sort of did it UFC style, where you basically built up to the two players with the highest UTR. I think it's a really interesting way to do that. I mean, round robin obviously its advantages as well. But I think there's a lot that tennis ought to be taking away. One of them, we always have this idea of regional tours sort of circulates every now and then, and for a variety of reasons, some of them expense related, some of them environmental, some of them, hey, if American fans had more events with more American players, would they be more inclined to watch the majors? I think regional tours is something that might get a little shot in the arm here. But, I think UFC is trying to basically, build and sustain its business. I think some of these exhibitions are fun and they're sort of stopgap measures, and it's a way for tournaments and promoters and TV, and the players can make a little money, but I don't think anyone's looking at it quite the way UFC is. If there were a tour event, that would be a different story.
The breaking news today is that the ITF has suspended all competition through July 31st. That means the Hall of Fame Open is canceled. I believe that also encapsulates Atlanta's date. But something that I've heard from a lot of the tournament directors, including Todd Martin today, is that the problem is really a financial one, where you don't get enough TV money to make up for the fact that there will be no fans. The silver lining to that is that it's probably not the case when it comes to the US Open, with the big ESPN deal and all that they have surrounding that tournament. What have you been hearing from the USTA and the US Open? I know you've been talking to people about their efforts to have a tournament.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think the US Open is very different in a lot of ways. I mean, the digits on the balance sheets and where the revenues come from. Honestly, I think ESPN is sort of driving the bus here. I mean, to those of us who live in the New York area, such as yourself, maybe you share it seems a little strange to be thinking about holding a tennis event when we all know what's going on in the ground and we all know what's going on in Queens. I think quite apart from the practical applications, getting the mayor's approval, the health and safety. I mean, I think there's an optics question. I'm not sure it's a great look when, we're holding tennis tournaments amid a pandemic, but ESPN really seems to want this to happen, and ESPN cuts a very large check to the USTA one that will single-handedly cover the prize money. So I think people are bending over backwards to at least. I mean, I think sort of backing up. I think it's a very healthy effort for tennis. I mean, I think it's a healthy exercise. This is a sport that's often accused of being stodgy and slow to embrace change and slow to innovate. So I think it's probably a healthy exercise. That suddenly we're talking about having, no fans at the U.S. Open and 62 different locker rooms so the players can all change in private. And how are we going to do health and safety and transportation and hospitality? I mean, I think it's healthy to go through this. I think the whole thing's a little weird, honestly. It shows you the power of TV. It shows you how beholden the USTA is to ESPN. I mean, the other story I hear is ESPN did not want to try and do this thing in November. It might come against football. 15 days of tennis programming is much more appealing in late August and early December than it is in late fall. I mean, I think we're getting a glimpse of just how powerful a force TV is. But I also think at the end of the day, if there's some version of the U.S. Open, it beats canceling it. So I think we all kind of selfishly, at some level, are rooting for this to happen. But it's the whole thing's part of you hopes they pull it off, and the other part is thinking, really, guys, this is we're in the middle of May, and you see, we have 85,000 deaths, and you see what New York looks like, and you hear what the governor and the mayor say, and you're really going to put your eggs in this basket. So we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, it's a bit of a PR nightmare to use all the resources necessary, especially with testing, that I know that the leagues are concerned about, like the MLB and the NBA. They are worried about that PR, I think. And it's another interesting contrast. I just want to shift to the players, and then I'll move on from COVID. If you talk to any MMA insider, like an Ariel Helwani, they'll tell you all the fighters want to fight. They're all down. They want to do this. But we've seen resistance from baseball players and basketball players saying, I don't know how far I'm willing to go. I don't know if I want to take a pay cut. I don't know if I want to quarantine. Where do you think tennis players would stand? What sacrifices would they be willing to make in order to play?
In keeping with today's theme, individual sports versus team sports. There are no guaranteed contracts. I mean, I think a few things. First of all, fighting is one shot, right? You go to Orlando, here's your fight, you're third on the card, you fight, you go home. Tennis is, I mean, these majors, they're talking about getting the players here 2 weeks early. You're talking about potentially being here a month. Could you imagine if you had 256 players, so 128 singles draw, men and women's? They come here, and on day 3, there are a couple of positive tests. That's a problem. We're not talking about, hey, come into town for one match and then you get to go home. We're talking about a possibly 1 month commitment. Could you imagine if there's some positive tests early in the tournament? What's going to happen? I mean, I know that was one of the concerns at Indian Wells. I think that it all depends on there's something else that's being revealed apart from how much TV drives the bus. Something else that's being revealed is that there is a big wage gap. There is income inequality in tennis. So the guy who's ranked number 50, who hasn't earned a dime in prize money in 90 days now, they may be very inclined to play the U.S. Open. Hell, I'll lose in the first round and you get 50 grand. I'll spend 14 days in quarantine for that. Is Roger Federer going to come? Is Rafa Nadal going to come? Is Serena Williams going to come? I think that's a much different story. I don't know what happens to them. But the U.S. Open is the U.S. Open. It's still going to count towards someone's major count. There are a lot of incentives. There are incentives in apparel contracts. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons for people to play, but I don't think Roger Federer's calculus is the same as Hubert Hurkacz. So I'll be interested to see if we keep having this discussion and if the U.S. Open sticks to this plan, what players are going to show up. There are players that are, Roger Federer may be encroaching on a net worth of $1 billion. And the guy on the side of the net from him may be living paycheck to paycheck. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see which players are willing to come and which aren't, because I suspect it won't be everyone.
Right. You have totally different perspectives there. One thing I want to challenge you on something that I've heard you talk about a lot, because I'm a former U.S. Open ball boy. And one of the innovations that I think you've correctly anticipated is that there will no longer be ball people handling the players' towels. It's funny though, because I've heard that from a bunch of people. Don't you think it's way more unsanitary for my hands to be all over a towel that the players proceed to wipe their face on? Because I not once was I ever on the court thinking about, and the optics, I understand the optics can be bad.
Right.
Not once did I feel that it was unsanitary for me, but a couple times I thought about the players.
Oh man, I mean, if you really need to towel off, you put a towel rack on the backs of the courts. You get the blue towel, you get the red towel. Walk yourself over and clean yourself off if you need it. I hadn't thought. I mean, I guess it's pretty gross for everyone. I mean, part of it is the biohazard, and you see some guy literally. There is a top player who I've literally seen like blow his nose in a towel and toss it at the ball kid, who
Oof.
without wearing gloves is catching this snot-filled towel and scampering off. I think you're right. I think it's pretty gross for everyone, but I think it's pretty easily correctable. I mean, there are players who wonder why we even need that. You play tennis, I play tennis. You sweat a little, but I'm not sure between when an opponent double faults, I don't feel like I need to go back to the fence and towel off. I think there's an easy fix here. You put 2 towel racks on the back of each court. You get one, your opponent gets the other, and nobody, much less the underpaid people under the age of 18, have to touch anything.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't object if they change the system and they put towel racks back there, but I do feel worse for the players than I do the ball people. So I wanted to see what your reaction to that would be.
It's funny though. I was talking. I can't remember who was telling me this. They said if you're from certain countries where there are quarantine rules, tennis is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Other countries, they really want you to use your own tennis balls and no one should touch them. And you can put sign your tennis ball so people know it's yours. Can you imagine the U.S. Open where you have, Spain might have stricter rules. So you have an RN tennis ball that only Nadal can use to serve. The opponent, when it's on his side, has to use his foot to scoop it up and hit it back over the net. But if the opponent's from the right country, then both players can touch the ball. I mean, I think we are going to see a lot of changes in tennis in the immediate future, and I'll be interested to see which of these stick and which of these are sort of precautionary. We get a vaccine and we go back to everyone handling everybody else's linens.
Yeah, it's wild. Did you know Ian Eagle was a linen boy? We learned that on the show. You just said linens, and it just triggered that thought. At the U.S. Open. Yeah, you should ask him about that. A linen boy. He was a ball boy, and then he became a linen boy. So, you excited for
didn't involve vegetables?
No, or salads.
As long as the linen didn't involve,
yeah,
right. As long as okay. P.F. Chang. All right. Anyway, I'll have to ask him about that.
Yeah. Are you looking forward to The Last Dance? For those who don't know, it's a 10-part Michael Jordan doc, basically chronicling his career. And I was wondering, John, when you're watching it, does he remind you, mainly talking about his mindset, not his on-court accomplishments, is there a tennis player he reminds you of?
Oh, man. I mean, it's funny because I feel a little like his personality is better suited for an individual sport than a team sport. If he's an athlete and he's like, I need to find artificial foes and perceived slice to psych myself up, you could say, yeah, I sort of see that. If you say, like, this is the guy who's calling Scott Barella ho, you say, what an asshole. Who wants to be this guy's team? Can I ask you a question? Wait, who's listening to this podcast? I'm just curious.
Die-hard tennis fans who care about how much Federer should slice.
No, I was going to say the Last Dance is a 10-part Michael Jordan documentary. To me, these days in this sport desert, it's like saying baseball is a game played on a diamond with bats. But
okay, let me add on to that. It's about 25% United States.
Oh, good. Okay, well then that's all right. Good. Then that's responsible. Good job. I have my own feelings on Jordan and this doc. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of his behavior is very well suited for an individual. It's going to be our inadvertent theme of the conversation, Gill. it's individual sport athlete stuff. I mean, it's very hard. I mean,
Right.
unless you're as good as Michael Jordan is, who would want to play with this guy? It's very much the behavior you see in individual sports, right? I mean, the perceived slight is Leighton Hewitt's career on that one, or I'm trying to think of. I mean, honestly, if we're talking candidly, I see some Serena in there. I did a piece maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, basically saying the one thing I'm watching this film and I'm really admiring Roger Federer, who never took that turn. And what do we say about Michael Jordan? He's a cold-blooded killer, and he's an assassin, and he's a hothead. But I mean, it's you never hear Roger Federer defined in those terms. This whole idea that you sort of have to be an asshole to be an elite athlete, Roger Federer blows that to pieces. I am surprised that Michael Jordan has final cut on this, right? So.
Right.
It's a great. I mean, I'm enjoying it. It's a great documentary. We're all watching it. But it's not journalistic. I mean, I think Ken Burns made this point as well. I mean, this is and it's great. I'm happy it's on. If the only way to get this footage and to get this done was to have Michael Jordan and Curtis Polk and SD Portnoy as executive producers, have them sign off on it, great. But I keep thinking, boy, if I don't think Jordan comes off particularly well, frankly. And I keep thinking, boy, if this is with Jordan's final cut, imagine what the unexpurgated version must look like. But no, I see a lot of his behavior and psychology in individual sport athletes, and it's a little jarring in a team. I mean, in a team dynamic, it's much more difficult. I mean, the Horace Grant stuff, the Scott Burrell stuff, even a couple of the stuff with Pippen. If it were just Michael Jordan on one side of the net and no one else, I think it would seem a lot more natural and more normal. But tennis players, a lot of the stuff comes straight from tennis. I mean, there's this whole idea of, I mean, again, I use Serena in the best possible way, but the perceived slight and the creating these artificial enemies, that's right. That's sort of tennis 101 right there.
I'm pretty sure Jordan is a Roger Federer fan. I know that he went to see him at the U.S. Open a couple years back. Let's take it to the big three for a moment. I think from reading your mailbag, from listening to your podcast, you tend to think that everyone over the age of 30 is pretty much disadvantaged by this break in time. But I'm not so sure, because there's the biological clock, which never stops ticking, and then there's wear and tear. And I'm almost tempted to say that the biological clock isn't quite as significant as the wear and tear that comes with actually, being on the tour and playing tournaments. So I don't know how much these three are actually aging while they sit at home and work out.
I think that's a great point. And I think, we talk about how tennis gets older and how a generation ago it was laughable to win majors in your mid-30s, and now it seems completely normal. I think we just don't know. And I do think, just as a math exercise, I mean, Roger Federer just needs, it's like stock portfolio. I mean, you just need Roger Federer and Serena Williams, they just need opportunities. If Roger's going to build on 20, if Serena's going to catch Margaret Court, and you're taking away opportunities, that's sort of, that's the basis. But this is obviously unprecedented. This is not like returning from an injury where you're out 6 months and you have a targeted return date. I just think, who knows? I mean, maybe, I wrote this sort of tongue in cheek, but I don't know. I mean, Novak Djokovic is a sensitive guy. We know that. He's taken a beating with a couple of PR gaffes. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the kind of thing that sets him back. On the other hand, maybe he's the youngest of the big three. Maybe this is what catapults him past the others. I mean, I can tell you, the first person that wins a major is going to say, this was a blessing in disguise. It really helped me focus. I tried to make the best of a bad situation. I mean, I think whoever wins majors is going to say this benefited me, and whoever loses is going to say this was a great hindrance. And this is, at some level, this is like nothing we've ever seen. I think it's a really good point, though. I mean, just sort of intuitively, yeah, it's going to hurt Serena Williams more than Coco Gauff, but I don't know. Maybe Serena Williams, this is a great disguised blessing that she can I'm just making this up, but she can be a wife and a mother without the guilt of travel, and it really clears her head. And you're right, she get that knee injury she didn't mention, but that dinged her up a little bit in Australia. She can shake that off, and she wins the 2020 U.S. Open in front of 11 fans. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be one of the great sort of we won't know until we see it. Again, you can prepare for a lot of things in sports, but this ain't one of them. So my answer is who knows. I think just mostly as a math exercise, I think the older players are disadvantaged, but I don't know, maybe Roger Federer's working out in his home gym and recovering from his knee surgery, and Nick Kyrgios weighs 260 pounds right now. He doesn't, but who knows? It will reveal a great deal, and we'll see.
I get the feeling they're going to hit the ground running. Novak Djokovic told Graham Bensinger, I don't know if it was yesterday or today, that he straight up intends to break the Grand Slam record. Do you like that out of Djokovic? Nadal certainly hasn't been that upfront about it.
No, it's funny because he said that once before. I think he even said that to Agassi, or Agassi says, however long I have to play, This is what I'm after. And it kind of didn't get much pickup. In full disclosure, Graham just sent me that interview, and I have not listened to it yet, though I'm a big fan of Graham's, and I'm eager to hear it. No, I always thought it was a bit of a misstep on Serena's part to state so flatly how badly she wanted to break Margaret Court's mark. I mean, I think it's, again, we talk about Michael Jordan. I mean, Margaret Court won these Australian Opens in 32 draws, and where 29 of the 32 players were Australian, and it was basically a local national championship when Australia's population was, 8 million people. I would hardly say that's comparable, but Serena needed, the same way Jordan needed some sort of created goal. Serena did much the same thing with this 24 majors, and I think it's been a bit to her detriment. I think it's, Roger and Rafa are very coy about that, and whatever it is, and I'm not really thinking about it. And at some level they are. I mean, everyone sort of knows what the benchmarks are, and everybody knows it's what the score in the race is. But I don't think it helps Serena to sort of basically target so publicly Margaret Court. I think it freights her with extra pressure. I think it sort of gives a little bit too much of a tell into where her head is. But I had heard that from Djokovic before, and I'm surprised. And we all should be blaming her. So apparently Djokovic said to Andre Agassi, "I'll play as long as I have to play if it means breaking this record." So he has expressed that sentiment before.
Yeah. Well, Serena, of course, 0-4 in her last 4 Slam finals. So that supports your point right there. I hate to ask you about last week's news, but I haven't covered it on this platform. The ATP-WTA merger. What's the main benefit of that in your eyes, and what's the main reason why that just might not be able to come together?
I mean, I think it's all about the terms and conditions, right? I mean, I think it makes sense. Intuitively, it makes sense. It's made sense for 40 years. The benefit is you go out there with this joint product, especially at a time of media sort of opportunity, but also balkanization. Wouldn't it be great to go to Amazon or Tennis Channel or ESPN and say, men's, women's, 2 tours, we're going to deliver male audience, female audience. It could be Coco Gauff, and it could be 16 years old. It could be a man 20 years older. It's a great hedge. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. The great question mark is sort of, what do the economics look like? And when, I mean, you can look at the 990s. I mean, this is just, you look at the filings, and the ATP's revenues are not the same as the WTA's revenues. How does that play out? My theory the whole time on all this is just forget about a couple of nickels on the table and just grow the damn pie. And I think combining tours is the way to do it. And you pay equal prize money at this mixed events, and the men probably have a case that they bring in 60% of the sponsorship, whatever it is. You know what? Sometimes you take one for the team, and it really would benefit the sport. It'd benefit fans. It would benefit presentation. It would be easier to follow. Just pay everyone the same rate, take the high road, and you figure you'll make it up with the streamlined product. And yes, the men are probably going to leave a few dollars on the table. Sometimes you do that for the good of the cause.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Was that from your understanding, and I'll end here, was that an initiative that started before the pause in the pandemic, or is that something that's been accelerated by these times?
I think both. I think yeah, I don't know. As long as we're talking candidly, I mean, there are, from talking to people, there's sort of two schools of thought. One of them is that Andrea Gaudenzi and Cavalli and Massimo Cavalli, the two new ATP chieftains, who I should point out get very high marks across the board. I mean, a lot of people who have no reason to say nice things are just gushing about these. I mean, I think they've really started off on a good note, and I think they both recognize that sports live and die by their media rights, and the best media package is going to benefit everyone. The sort of conspiracy theory is that if the Asia Tour, if the Asia Swing doesn't happen for the WTA, it's really a financial hit. And the WTA made this very, very big Asia bet. We see what the prize money is in Shenzhen for the year-end event. And if the WTA doesn't go to Asia, it is very vulnerable. And this is sort of blood in the water and pressure points. And this is much less of a merger than some sort of an acquisition. So that's sort of the glass half full. Is you have these two progressive male executives that think this benefits the sport overall, and you have the more pessimistic, this is opportunistic, and the WTA is sort of ripe for some sort of acquisition.
Yeah, well, I hope there aren't too many casualties there. John, this has been tons of fun. We've covered a million things, I feel like, and I really appreciate you taking some time out of a very busy schedule at the moment.
I appreciate it. Those were great questions. Stick around in tennis. We need young journalistic talent, and we'll see you at the French Open. How's that?
Yeah, I like that idea. Anything to promote?
Anything to promote? Oh, that would
The
be
record?
distasteful.
How about the record?
Oh yeah, the record. We're doing a new podcast at Sports Illustrated. The record. Talked a little Jordan on that. I don't know when this is going up, but we have a fun 60 Minutes piece Sunday, and I will say that Tennis Channel, I think, has really done itself proud during this crisis. There's a live show for 3 hours, noon Eastern. They'll be broadcasting. You mentioned the UTR for the men. There's a UTR event for women, and I think I'm not just saying this because I'm a proud employee. I think Tennis Channel has really done itself proud.
Agreed.
These last few months.
Well, thanks, John. Hope to do it again soon.
You got it. Thanks. That was great.